Thank you for listening to this free audiobook. Tricked is a fun little prequel book for the Chasing the Crown series. By Cassie M. Shiels. I hope you enjoy reading about this clever witch and foiled prince. And now, Tricked. Chapter 1, Jemma. Left out to die. It's a strange and horrifying concept. Something to fear. Something to threaten your enemies with or curse them with. Left out to die felt like the worst thing someone could condemn you to. Ever. That is, until you experience it yourself. In reality, it is more boring than horrifying, more distressingly uncomfortable than excruciatingly painful, and more annoying than a paper cut. And hot. Like really hot. Extremely hot. One side of my face cracked and blistered from the sun, while the other felt cool and smooth by comparison. I licked my lips to try and moisten the half that felt the sun's full power. Curse that man for hanging me up here with my hair tied up. If it were hanging down, I wouldn't be suffering from the effects of the sun. I sighed and yanked at the ropes tightly wrapped around my wrists, legs, ankles, and ribs. My shoulders screamed with pain from the pressure of the ropes digging into my armpits. The weight of my body against those ropes made every second worse. My skin felt raw underneath the rough fibers of the ropes. Yanking did no good. They'd fisted my hands and covered them in leather so I couldn't use magic to help myself, and of course, they'd hung me off a cliff on a creaky old tree. Add the road no one traveled, and I was doomed. Literally, left out to die. I sighed and looked down at the sharp rocks far below my feet. The river that usually tore through this gorge was nothing but a trickle now that summer began to change to the cold of the coming fall. If the ropes holding me failed, would I have time to save myself before I hit bottom? I had no idea. If I could free my hands, my magic might prove enough, but then again, I had no guarantee. The only relief I could look forward to was the sun setting. I glanced to the west and sighed. Another hour at least. I slumped against the bines and tried to think of anything to escape, but I had nothing to try. He meant for me to die here, and I would, from the looks of it. I rolled my wrists again, wincing as the raw flesh tore further against the roughness of the ropes. I could not do it. I could not move any of my fingers. My necklace flapped uselessly against my chest. I moaned and closed my eyes, unsure of what to wish for at this point. Did I want to be free or die? Either was preferable to this torture. The sound of someone kicking rocks grabbed my attention. My eyes flung open. Wait, could someone actually be walking on this forsaken road? I twisted and turned, the old tree branch above my head cracking at my sudden movement. I saw a young man, probably close to my age, striding down the road nearby. His sword on his belt and fancy attire reminded me of my captor. I looked away and took a deep breath before looking back. He kicked the rocks while mumbling to himself. His fists were clenched, and he punched the air with every swing of his foot. He sent the rocks skittering ahead with enough force to fly several yards away. I debated about calling out. Would a furious man save me? Or would he push me to my death? If half of my face wasn't burning and itchy to the point I wished I could dig my fingernails into it and rip it off, I might let him pass on his furious way, but as it was, I could hardly stand the torture of the sun and the fear of the impending fall anymore. He might save me. It was worth the risk. Help me, please. I can see you on the road, I called out. He didn't so much as look my way. I tried again, putting as much power in my voice as I could muster. Help me, please. He turned to look at me, but instead of shock or pity registering on his face, he groaned. He stamped his foot against the ground like an angry child and shook his head. He threw his arms up in the air in a silent curse at the sky and slumped his shoulders. More confused than ever, I watched him slowly walk my way, still kicking rocks. He flopped down in the grass next to me and looked me up and down. His lips pressed in a straight line, and his eyes rolled. Let me guess, you're a damsel in distress, he said, looking away from me to the sunset, his voice all monotone. Obviously, I replied. He wasn't a dimwit, was he? He looked like a nobleman. He sighed and shook his head, his hands fiddling with the long grass at the tree's base. Shouldn't he be assessing the situation, yelling for help, or trying to figure out how to help me? Does your hair always look like burnt bread that grew ugly dirty roots, or is that just today's look? Excuse me. It took all of my strength to keep my jaw from falling open. How dare he? I'm hanging over a cliff about to die, and all you can do is insult me further. Who are you, the guy who pelts people in the stalks with the rottenest tomato you can find? He laughed. No, I'm a prince. I gave him a sideways glance. Sure, his attire pointed toward nobility or royalty, but a prince? I thought princes were all about proving themselves. Killing dragons, rescuing beautiful women, hunting down outlaws. You're teasing me. He laid back against the trunk of the tree. I'm not. I hate to break it to you, lady, but if my father had a rating system, a damsel in distress would rank a lot lower than defeating a fire-breathing dragon. She wouldn't even count in his book. In his book, you're not even worth the effort or the time. What about your book? The tree branch I hung from crackled, a warning for the shattering break about to come. I hated to beg but had little choice. Please, help me. He picked a long blade of grass and twirled it around his fingers. Are you sure you can't get out of this mess yourself? I've had a horrible day and don't need this. What? You've had a bad day. Was he serious? Could he really be this selfish? I paused before I yelled at him. I knew royals to be self-centered and low. That's how I'd gotten into this mess, trusting a royal. Now my only hope was another egotistic prince. He stood, stopping my thoughts. I mean, honestly, I feel like most damsel in distress situations are a ruse to capture a prince's attention. Or the girl was stupid. Take Rapunzel. She had all that long hair. I don't know why she didn't use it to climb down from her tower herself. I couldn't argue with him there, but I couldn't escape this mess. I'd tried for hours. Nor did I have much time left. I looked at the great expanse of nothingness under my bound hanging feet and tensed. This is no trick, I promise you. I will definitely fall to my death. Are you going to help me or not? He shrugged. I just killed a dragon, and my father was hardly impressed. You know what he said when I entered the throne room covered in dragon blood and guts, triumphant from the win? No. Nothing. He didn't say anything. He just looked me up and down and frowned. I had the gall to ask if he'd heard me. And instead of acknowledging me, he turned to my older brothers as if I wasn't even in the room. He said, dragons are being slain every day, you know. It isn't an accomplishment anymore, even peasants can do it. He stood up and kicked a rock at the edge of the cliff. It broke free and sailed down into the ravine. I watched it fall, and the tree branch above my head creaked again. I didn't have time for this, but I couldn't stop him from ranting. I don't like dragons. They're scaly pests that aren't even cool to slay anymore. I feel like the pest control guy. Not a prince who deserves praise and honor for such a task. Not even the townspeople cheered my name when I returned to them covered in dragon muck. He fell back down onto the grass. Dragon muck and singed hair is the only reward I will get. I blame my brothers, all 4 have killed dragons before me. No wonder it isn't an amazing feat anymore. He looked over at me, his light blue eye connecting with mine. If I save you, it will count for nothing. Excuse me? Did you call me nothing? I'm a living, breathing person at least for right now. Didn't he have any compassion? Was impressing his father all that counted in this young prince's big, bloated head? He mashed the grass in his fingers. I'm sure you're nice, and all, but are you worth my time? Worth your? Who in the heck do you think you are? I seriously regretted calling him over. This was worse than being left out to die and half burnt by the sun. Prince Holden, 5th son of King Aragnot. The one son who will not earn a place to compete for the chance to become king. He leaned over the cliff and dropped a piece of grass. We watched it fall into the depths of the ravine until we could no longer see it. It would probably disappear in the rough water at the bottom. I understood he felt down on his luck, but I wasn't about to let his lousy day end my life for good. Right, well, Your Mighty Highness, I can't save myself, or I already would have. I'm not some dumb girl whose only ambition is to get rescued and promised in marriage. My hands are bound in leather, I cannot use my powers like this, and if I yank too hard, I think the branch above me will break, and I'll fall. His eyes followed mine to the old creaky branch. I know it won't count for you, but if you save me, it will mean everything to me. Please have some compassion. His face hardened. I am not the lowly, weak prince everyone thinks I am. I should have a fair chance at the throne, but no. Nothing I do is worthy enough. Gah! I'd had enough of him. I'm sorry to interrupt what might become a nice monologue, but I will die here. Hold on, let me talk first. I think getting it all out of my system is helping me feel better. Why? I'm the one about to fall to my death. Don't you think I get priority in this situation? I glared at him, but I couldn't tell if he could see the look on my face. No, you're not going anywhere from the looks of things. That old branch might be creaky, but it is solid. Besides, after I save you, you'll not listen to another word I say. You'll skip off to do your own thing without even a thank you. I need someone actually to listen to me. I intensified my glare at him, and he glared back. I couldn't stop the tears from welling up as the tree creaked again. A single tear rolled down my cheek, and I couldn't even wipe it away. I could see his anguish was almost as bad as mine. He needed sympathy if he was going to reach out and help a stranger. I took a calming breath and pushed back all the curses I wanted to shout at his head. Prince Holden. I don't know if you understand how painful and scary this is for me. If you save me, I promise I will sit down and listen to whatever you say. I won't run away. I swear on my life. Your father may not care, but saving me must be worth it to you. Especially if I am willing to listen. He looked down at his hands, his eyes thoughtful. Finally, he looked back up at me. What's your name? Jemma. Okay, Jemma, you know if you make a promise to a prince, you are entitled to keep it. Oh my word, of course, I knew that. What did he take me for? Some lowly peasant who sold dirt for a living? Yes, your highness, pull me to safety already. He leaned over the edge and finally assessed the situation. He wrapped his arm around the tree branch, causing it to crack even more. My eyes widened, and I saw his did too. The branch wasn't as solid as he thought. Quickly he pulled out a dagger from his boot. He wasn't about to cut the rope and let me fall. He laughed. I'm not going to hack off your arm if that is what you're worried about. I wouldn't put it past you. Hey, I am not the bad guy. He reached out and grabbed the rope right above my head. He pulled me closer to the cliff wall until my toes touched the tall grasses tops. When I cut this, you must trust one will catch you. Trust him. I looked him in the eye. He might have acted selfishly, but I saw the sincerity in his eyes right then. I gulped and nodded. You ready? I closed my eyes. More than ready. 1, 2, 3. He held onto the ropes by my hands and sliced through the rope above my head like it was made of silk. At the same time, he pulled me toward him. We struggled not to fall together but finally landed on the grassy cliff. I lay across his stomach, both of us breathing hard. Thank you, I gasped, still bound, but I no longer felt like my life would end in a tragic fall. Gently he rolled me off of him, and he sat up. Should I ask why you were hung out and left to die? I rolled my eyes. Only a decent person would. I was being punished. I held up my hands, and he sliced through the ropes. I flexed my swollen fingers, my wrists raw and bloody from the rough fibers. For what? He asked, cutting off the leather covering my hands. He looked to see if more ropes needed cutting before he sheathed his dagger and helped me pull off the ropes. For choosing not to act like an evil witch. He whipped his head around fast, judging from the pain that flashed through his eyes, he must have strained his neck. He reached up and rubbed his neck. His eyes were no longer friendly. Witch? You just said, witch. I stood up and shook off the last of the ropes. Yes, I'm a witch, but not evil, so stop worrying. He chewed on his bottom lip and kept his face averted. Probably so I couldn't read his thoughts. Good. I liked him better now that he was afraid of me. Any particular reason why someone wanted you to act evil? He asked, still facing away from me. I sighed and sat down. Yeah, but I promised to listen to your story, remember, not tell mine.
Chapter 2, Holden. The witchy girl settled in the grass next to me, spreading her dirty skirt around her in a circle. She acted like nothing had happened. Like we had met up here for a friendly chat. She stared at me with her dark brown eyes and waited. Not even a real thank you for saving her. Gah! I should have known she would ignore that I had just saved her life. Figures. I doubted I could trust her, being a witch, but she was willing to listen, and I wanted to talk. More than I wanted, thanks. I flipped onto my belly and looked over the gorge at the water rushing past the deadly-looking rocks. I want nothing more than to win a chance to become crown prince. A chance to become king. Doesn't that right go to the oldest in your family? Usually, in most other countries, that is the case, but not in ours. Our bylaws allow either option to be determined by the current king. My father has chosen a competition for the honor of becoming the crown prince. I think that's because he won the kingdom from his older brother. See, all the boys in the royal family have a chance to impress the king and become worthy of the crown prince's role. The law decrees that until the last son turns 18. I pointed at myself to make sure she didn't get lost. We all have a chance to impress the king to earn a spot to fight for the right to become crown prince. She nodded in understanding. I turned over and sat up. She was keeping her promise and not cursing me, so I might as well face her. After we have earned a spot to compete, we have to battle each other in some great event chosen by our father for the title. All 4 of my brothers have already earned their spot to compete to become the crown prince, except me. And I turn 18 in 4 days. If I don't prove my worth, I am out of the competition for good. I chanced a look at her. She probably didn't care. I found her still staring at me, intent, almost genuinely interested. A small bubble of hope welled up in my belly. Maybe she actually understood my pain. I inched a little closer to her and looked her in the eye. See, for Grayson to be awarded a chance to become the crown prince, all he had to do was slay the black dragon. It was cool and impressive, even because he was the first to kill a dragon. Gavin got off easy too. He rescued a maiden from an ogre nest. Bam, he's officially in the running. Hayden had to work harder but was finally awarded his chance by defeating the outlaw Rowan and his band of misfits. But only because my father desperately wanted to get rid of them. And my last brother Kaysen captured the evil wizard, Klaus. Something even I can't grouch about. But me? Nothing I do is good enough. Why not? She pulled her hair out of its frazzled bun, letting it fall past her waist and ruffling it. Now she looked even more like a witch than before. Because my brothers have already done it all. It's hard to be impressive when everyone can say they've seen it before. I killed a dragon that was terrorizing a town today, and no one cares. I rescued you, and look. I pointed to the blank hills. No one cares. I care, I hope you know. I could have died over there. She grabbed hold of her necklace full of odd slivers of different colored objects, some metal, some wood, and some I couldn't tell. She patted the half of her face that looked red and raw with her fingers. Slowly, her skin began to bubble, and far too quickly, it seemed almost normal again. I took a step back from her. My heart pounded in anticipation of her turning her magic on me. I wouldn't say I liked the idea of becoming a toad, or a tree, or whatever witches cursed people with. But she set her necklace back down and turned her attention back to me, her hands clasped in her lap. She smiled, and oddly, I found myself smiling back. Hey, she had magic, perhaps she could help me. Jemma. You don't by chance have a witch code that means you have to serve me for life now or something? Her head jerked up, her eyes scrunched, and her dark brown hair fell in front of her face. I swallowed hard. There may be better ways to ask for help. Excuse me, she said, her voice low and careful. I held up my hands. I didn't need a mad witch to add to the torment of my day. No, I need some help, is all. I didn't mean to offend you. So, how about you ask for it like a normal person? I sighed, because no one has ever wanted to help me become crown prince. Everyone still thinks that honor belongs to my oldest brother, even though Grayson had it easier than any of us. Her eyes narrowed briefly before a slight smile appeared on her lips. Holden, I have an idea. I owe you for saving me, not in the way you implied, but... She clapped her hands, and a full smile appeared, making her look less like a witch and more like a regular girl. I know what you need to do. I didn't know if I should act worried or excited. She was a witch, after all. Okay, what is your idea? You need to do something no one has ever done before, right? Yes. Something so important there is no way they can't deny you a place to compete to become crown prince. Right? I stood up. I didn't need my problems thrown right back in my face. Yes. But I told you nothing I do. Shush, Holden. I have the answer. She waited until I sat back down. What if you rescued the one person who thinks he's got the crown prince thing in the bag? You're talking about my oldest brother? Of course I am. Listen, Holden, they might not care if you rescue a damsel or kill a dragon or anything else you've done, but if you rescue the favorite for the crown prince, they cannot ignore that. They cannot shrug you off. They will owe you. Owe you big for saving him. I snapped my fingers. Big enough to give me a chance to compete. She was so right. I couldn't believe I didn't think of it myself. Grayson himself couldn't ignore it if I saved him. Me, his youngest brother. And father would do anything for his precious firstborn son. But there was one problem with her idea. I felt deflated faster than I'd felt hope. I fell back onto the grass. Jemma, I like it. You're right. It would work. But you've forgotten one important thing. Grayson is not in any trouble. He spends his days in the castle eating and sword fighting. He doesn't need saving. Jemma's smile only grew. And you've forgotten something important too. I am a witch. We can make this happen. I know it is a bit irregular, but you sometimes have to make your own fate. For this to work, we need to kidnap him only to save him. He won't get hurt at all, and we will guarantee that, and you'll become a hero. I looked her up and down. What she suggested went against every code of honor I knew. But if we ensured he was safe, I didn't see why I couldn't decide my fate. I didn't know how much I could trust a witch sentenced to death by someone, but she had proven trustworthy so far. I honestly had no other options left and no one else I could turn to. The rules of chivalry had yet to help me. Father taught that when one plan failed, you had to develop a stronger one that used different tactics. I nodded. Yes. I think you're right. This could work. Of course, it will. We will stash him in a nearby cave and claim the dragons were seeking revenge, and then after everyone is fully freaked out and desperate, we will, well, you will save him. Before I knew what I was doing, I hugged her. Whoa, I was embracing a witch. An intelligent witch, but still a witch. You're brilliant. Thank you. I let her go and stood up. Clearing my throat, I offered her my hands. She let me take hers, and I pulled her up. Maybe fate didn't want me to miss my chance, perhaps fate had led me to her today. We could pull this off, and I could find a way to become crown prince. Come on, Jemma, let's get out of here and start planning. I turned to leave, but she pulled me back. Holden. I turned to look at her. Thank you for saving me. I smiled, a slight warmth filled my heart, and I offered her a slight bow. It was my honor. We started down the road at a fast pace. She followed at my pace for a while but started to lag a bit behind. I felt terrible that I didn't have a horse to offer her or something. She was left out to die most of the day, probably for a good reason. I'd have to deal with that later. After a few minutes, she reached out and pulled on my shoulder. Holden, can we slow down for a second? I wanted to groan. Didn't she know how important this was to me? Probably not. Listen, Jemma. It will still take us an hour to get to the castle. The sun is going down. If we are going to do this, we need to do it right now. I know you're desperate, but we must discuss a real plan. I think tomorrow. No way, not tomorrow or tomorrow night. We are doing this tonight. Jemma, I have 4 days. 4, and then my chances are gone. We have to kidnap my brother, give it enough time for people to worry about him, then I have to promise my father that I will find him and make him agree that if I do, I will win my spot. You'd better get that in writing, she said. Oh, I will. I wasn't stupid enough to do this and not have a guarantee. But I can't just save him 20 minutes later, or what will people think? She sighed and rubbed her shoulder. That you knew where he was all along. Exactly. This may be your slightly evil plan, but I will make sure nothing goes wrong. She yawned. Fine, then. I hope your castle has a good-sized herb garden. Why? Well, I can't go home and get any of mine, and we need a couple of different herbs to help us get your brother out of the castle. Herbs? She wasn't going to make a vile potion, was she? She never said anything about that. You're not going to turn him into anything unnatural, are you? She laughed, her face heavy with shadows from the little light left from the fading sun. Of course not. Guilt twisted in my gut. Should I have freed her? Should I have taken her suggestion? She said she wasn't evil, but anyone could say that. I looked over at her, and she flashed me a smile that relaxed me. Was that magic? Could smiles hold magic too? I shook my head to clear it, just in case. We have the largest herb garden in the kingdom, it's near the rose gardens. Perfect, then I think we're in business, Holden. She took a few steps but stopped when she realized I wasn't following. I need to do this, I thought. This is the only chance I have left. Coming? Yeah, I'm coming. I forced a smile to my lips and strode forward. I swallowed down all of my worries. Maybe if I made her think we were friends, she wouldn't hex me until I could get rid of her after I had my claim to the throne well in place.
Chapter 3, Jemma. Holden proved to be more fun than I first thought. We argued over this or that until we came to the castle's walls. More guards stood in place at night than in the daytime. Holden waved me over, and we slipped into the dark shadow of one of the shops before the castle gates. This might be a good time to use some of your magic. They will let me in, but I don't know about you. And if I convince them to let in a stranger, their most prized prince goes missing. I get it. I'll become suspect number 1. That I had to avoid. I never liked changing my appearance by magic. It felt weird, like I was slipping on someone else's skin. I need a few things. A hair from your head. I yanked out a strand of his hair. Ouch. He rubbed his head and gave me an annoyed look that I found more adorable than aggravating. And we need to switch cloaks. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I unclasped my dull, threadbare black cloak and held it out. He pulled off his soft, creamy-colored cloak with fur lining, and we exchanged. I wiggled the strand of hair between my fingers and whispered the incantation I thought I'd never use again. When it began to glow slightly, I knew the spell had worked. To everyone, I will look like someone similar to yourself. You need to act like I belong here. You're not serious. I watched his eyes widen as my appearance must have morphed in front of his eyes. His jaw fell open, his eyes darting up and down me repeatedly. Yes, I am. I took a deep breath and held the hair tight in my hands. Holding spells took a lot more work than it looked. I punched him in the arm. Thanks for getting me an examination trial with the captain of the guard, I said loud enough to draw the eyes of the guards. I know many other nobles think of such an office beneath them, but I've been dreaming of this day my whole life. Holden shook his head and mumbled under his breath. This isn't going to work. Trust me, I whispered back. Holden's eyes narrowed, but he threw his hands up in the air and raised his voice too. I know. That's why I'm helping you. He leaned a little closer and whispered. I hope that you know what you're doing. My heartbeat increased with his nearness. Annoyed, I took a deep breath to slow it back down. I look like a young man going to the barracks and the captain of the guard. This will work. I shoved him out onto the street, and we approached the guards. Prince Holden and, Galahad, son of, Fredero. I barely resisted rolling my eyes. Come on, Holden, I know you can do better than that. This disguise only worked if we could pull off our mannerisms and keep the secret. His face alone could blow it. He smiled, and so did I, while the guards studied us, their hands gripping the handles of their swords. And where are you and Galahad going? Holden softly punched the guard in the shoulder. I got him an examination with Pelican. I told him that he'd want to see the barracks before he signed up to join our army. Right? Holden laughed, but the guard did not look impressed. The guard shook his head and let out a low, guttural sound but stepped aside. If you're vouching for him, Prince, he's your responsibility. Weapons? Don't I know it? And I'm keeping my weapons. Galahad doesn't have any. Holden waved me through, but the guard put a hand on his shoulder. You're not pulling something again, young prince? No. I'm helping a friend. Let go, or I shall report your insubordination to my father. The guard's lips curled, but he let Holden go. Holden waved to him in a way that looked more like a salute. We quickly walked through the gates and in the direction of the barracks. Do I want to know? It's nothing. Just innocent mischief. Come on. I dropped the hair I had been twisting between my fingers, and we skirted around the castle, past the barracks, and to the rose gardens. We followed a path to the back herb gardens. I hope you know what you're looking for enough to find it in the dark. I'm not some mediocre witch, you know. He shrugged. You were hanging over a cliff and couldn't save yourself, so what do I know? The infuriating man, if he kept talking like that, I'd let him deal with his own problems. For your information. My hands were covered and bound so that I couldn't move them. I need to move my fingers to do my magic. I pulled out my necklace full of tiny slivers of objects. I picked a small wooden fragment in my fingers, rubbed my hands together, and murmured a spell I knew well. My hands began to glow, and I moved them over the plants, looking for the right ingredients. Geez, Jemma, how did you do that? Holden said, standing straighter as if trying to block the dim light coming from my hands. I shrugged. I need objects to help me channel my magic. This, I said, pointing to my long necklace covered with tiny slivers of things, is full of all kinds of things. I am pinching a sliver from a lit torch so my hands can glow. Well, that is unsettling. Do you want me to help you or not? I asked, ripping up the herbs I needed. I kept my eyes averted from him. I didn't need to see the fear or desire I knew I'd see on his face. Everyone felt either one or the other about magic. He sighed and sat down beside me. What are you going to do with them anyway? I huffed. Of course, he wanted to chat while I needed to concentrate. I can't do anything with my magic without help. Remember the hair? I have to hold things that have what I need to complete the spell inside of them. Get it? He nodded slowly. I walked to another part of the garden and knelt when I found the herb I sought. So, you're gathering things for a spell. What are you getting here? I sent a glare his way, but I don't think he could see it in the dark. Valerian root, lavender, chamomile flower, and passion flower. These are all herbs that help people relax and sleep. We need to put your brother to sleep, hopefully without him seeing either of us, and it needs to last a long time. Holding a spell is hard, but gathering a lot of the herbs will help me hold the spell longer. I need my sleeping spell as strong as possible. I ripped out more chamomile flowers while I spoke. Now all we need is the passion flower. A torchlight and 2 guards rounded the castle. Holden's head whipped back and forth between the guards and me. Before I had a second to react, he tackled me down to the ground. I spat out a mouthful of dirt only to have his hand slapped over my mouth a second later. Hold still. As much as I disliked him pushing me to the ground, I appreciated his warmth in the cold night air. We lay still in his arms while the guards strolled past the garden. My heart pounded a little faster, but I couldn't tell if it was from the feeling of his arms encasing me or from the guard's nearness. I waited until I could no longer see the torchlight before I tried to move. They're gone. He didn't budge. Just barely. It's in their training to look back and check one last time. Hold on. I sighed and picked at the plants under my hands. Okay. He rolled off of me and crawled forward a few feet, his eyes on where the guard had disappeared. That was so close. Could have been worse. I lit my hands again and raced through the gardens until we found the passion flower. I knelt and started picking. Okay, how are we getting inside? You can climb, right? Or fly? He raised his eyebrows in question. I laughed. What kind of question is that? Of course, I can't fly. I don't know where that rumor started. But I can climb. Good, because we are getting in the way. I usually sneak out. He waved me to the castle, and I followed him, brushing dirt off my skirts. Leave the castle often? You have no idea, he laughed. I'd go mad if I stayed in there with their stringent rules all the time. He led me to a corner of the castle not far from the gardens where a large tree grew. He began climbing the tree without so much as a word to me. Stuffing the herbs in my bodice, I followed him. The tree stretched high enough that we could climb up onto a skinny ledge. I watched him stretch out and grab at what looked like a handhold chiseled out of the stone. I laughed silently. Wonder who put that there? Once his fingers were settled, he stepped off the tree and onto the ledge. I opened my mouth, but he shook his head and pointed to the window above our heads. He then mimed his throat getting slit and shook his head. Message clear, I quietly followed him. The ledge barely fit my tiny feet. He must have been balancing on only the front half of his own feet. Settled on the ledge, he nodded to the window a few feet away to our left. We shuffled over to it, holding on to the rough stone. Never had I wished that the rumors were true and witches could fly. It made me wonder if I held on to a bird and could borrow that ability as I did with herbs and other objects. At the window, I watched Holden pull the latch open, with a string that had been placed there in preparation for something like this, and then swing inside. Careful of my footing, I put my hands on the sill and followed him. The drop was much more profound than I expected, and I stumbled, bumping into his back. He shot forward and landed hard on his knees. The bang wasn't a sound easily ignored. Trying to kill me? He asked in an angry whisper. If I were trying, you'd be dead, I snapped. Footsteps sounded outside the door. Holden grabbed me and put his hand over my mouth. The footsteps paused every few feet as if they were listening, but they soon moved past the door. Heart racing, I pushed him away from me. I'm capable of staying quiet on my own, you know. Ha ha. He got up and slowly opened the door. Light spilled into the room, much smaller than I thought and full of random cleaning objects. Sneak in this way a lot? He smiled, his eyes sparkling in the light. More than you know. You don't happen to have that hair still, do you? Are you kidding? After all of that? I hope you're glad I still have all the herbs. I'm a witch, not a miracle worker. He sighed. True, I think it would look better if you didn't, well, if you didn't look like you. I agree. I reached out and plucked another hair from his head. Ouch. A little warning. I laughed at the way his face scrunched. Sorry. Not really. He was kind of cute when he was angry. I said my spell to make the hair glow and nodded at him. We walked into the lit hallway, and luckily no one else stood in the hall. That is until we reached Grayson's room. 2 guards sat across from his door in an alcove. I wouldn't say I liked the idea of fighting guards. Any ideas? Holden thought for a moment, and before I knew what was happening, he pulled his dagger out and twirled me around so that his blade lay across my throat. A little warning? I whispered, nudging him in the ribs. He chuckled. Go with it, he said before marching me forward. Grayson, he called, causing the guards to jump. I've caught the man taking your favorite sword at practice. He nodded to one of the guards, who knocked and opened the door. I got this, no need to come inside. The guard nodded and moved back into the hall. Grayson struggled out of his bed piled high with fur blankets. His eyes landed on Holden and me. He picked up a pillow and tossed it toward us. It missed by a few feet. Holden, I told you never to come into my room, he bellowed, freeing himself from his blankets. Holden let go of his dagger but whispered, I can stall him for a minute or 2. Your spell better work fast. He shrugged his shoulders and put his dagger back in his boot. I dropped Holden's hair. I couldn't hold both spells. The amount of concentration would probably kill me. I knew the moment the spell faded because Grayson's eyes narrowed at me. Rat's legs, I knew it, he'd recognized me. I pulled the herbs out of my bodice and smashed them together in my hand to ensure they mixed and began murmuring. Grayson stormed over to us. Why are you with her? How did you get out? His eyes suddenly rolled into the back of his head, and he dropped. Holden caught him. Wait, I'm confused. Do you know him? He poked his brother to make sure he was still breathing. The truth was a simple yes, but I wanted to avoid getting into that right then. Later, we need to figure out how to get out of here. He gave me a blank stare. Great, we are the worst villains ever. Holden snapped his fingers. I know. Turn him invisible. I've often seen our royal wizard do it to impress our foreign dignitaries. I rolled my eyes, honestly, these princes. Holden, I am a regular everyday witch. I am not some grand wizard who's studied spells and enchantments all day for years. I held up my necklace. If I can't hold at least a piece of it in my hand, I can't do anything. Invisibility is something you learn at a wizard school, not something you put a shard of on a necklace. Wait, you really can't turn him invisible? He said this with such conviction that I couldn't help but laugh a little. Good grief. Do all royals think we can do anything you desire if we have magic? Holden shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. Apparently, or else he wouldn't have asked me to do something so ridiculous. If I didn't want to help him with this, I would have walked out of there already. Well, you're going to have to come up with something, Miss Clever. We can't live in this room forever. He had a point. I looked around the room. A large shaggy dog slept by the fire. I laughed, and Holden gave me the stink eye. Did Grayson ever make you walk his dog? Sure, but what does? No. Yes. Before he could argue, I raced across the room and added the dog hair to the sleeping potion. With a slight change to the spell, I knew it would work. Grayson shuddered and slowly shrunk. He grew hair and a long tail. Jemma? Holden's eyes grew wider with every change made to his brother. It's not permanent, I said, waving the herbs and the hair under his nose and taking a deep breath to keep my concentration. Now let's go. It's more taxing than you'd think to hold a spell for long, and this one is strong. Holden heaved Grayson on his shoulder, and we opened the door. Holden paused. What about you? I shrugged. I'll stay out of sight. The guards already saw what they needed to see, and hopefully, their eyes will be on you and the dog.
Chapter 4, Holden. Thank goodness Jemma had magic. No one questioned me taking the dog out for a walk, even if the dog lay flopped in my arms. He was a lazy dog anyway. We walked through the halls I knew fewer people frequented. But when the fresh air hit us in the face, I had no idea how we would get through the front gates. I say we take a side entrance. Don't you? They haven't already heard one of my excuses tonight. I knew from experience that if a guard saw me more than once, I would get into trouble. Father didn't need any reason to suspect my involvement in this part of the plan. Or how about no entrance? She waved me over to the stables. A large pile of hay lay against the wall. If we jumped, we might make it. I stood on tiptoe and lugged Grayson the dog onto the top of the wall. I had to dig my fingers into the edge of the wall right before the top and climb up. Jemma was more than a few inches shorter than me. I reached back down for her. She grabbed onto my wrists, and I yanked her up after me. We sat there for a moment catching our breath. I never thought I'd like working with a witch. I knew she hadn't changed so much as one thing about herself, but she started to look less like a tumbleweed to me. She was intelligent, funny, and dangerous. Her magic freaked me out, but it came in useful too. We clambered down the other side of the wall and saw an old cart sitting against a shop wall. I'll bring it back to them later, I said, lugging Grayson across the street. She nodded, and we tossed Grayson into the wagon and drove directly to the mountain caves. The sky began to lighten when we arrived. Let's not make this complicated. Any cave will do. She nodded. Agreed. I picked up Grayson and followed her to a cave with a squat entrance not far from the road. Listen, Jemma. I must be at home when this all becomes a mess. Can I trust you to watch him? Can you trust me? Her eyes scrunched in confusion. Do you really feel like you have to ask that? I shrugged. Probably not, but this part was vital. I didn't want to mess it up and get Grayson or me into trouble. You are a witch, after all. Yeah, a witch who is helping you. She rolled her eyes and settled into the curve of the rock, looking away from me. I felt a pain in my gut. I hadn't meant to hurt her. I laid Grayson down, and she pulled out the dog hair from the spell. He slowly morphed back into his usual self. She added a few more sprigs of herbs to refresh the spell and make it easier to hold. How long will he be out? She looked at the mushed herbs in her hands and nudged them with a finger. They began to shine with a new invigorated glow. If I had to guess, I have enough herbs to keep the spell going until this evening. Once I run out of herbs, the spell will slowly fade away. He'll wake about an hour after that. Good, I can return here by then. I turned to the mouth of the cave. But stopped. I couldn't leave without saying what had churned in my mind. Hey Jemma, I've been a real jackanape. And you put up with me today. Thank you. She sighed, a slight smile on her lips. Thank me after this is all over. You'd better get out of here. I nodded but turned to take one last look at the two of them in the cave. My brother, still in dog form, lay on the stone, and Jemma lay back against the rocks, her eyes on her spell. It made no sense for me to worry about them, especially Jemma, but I couldn't help it. She made my heart leap in my chest in a way I hadn't felt before, which unnerved me. I checked to make sure there was no sign of danger heading their way before I walked back over to the wagon. I unhooked it from the borrowed horse and pushed it behind an overgrown bush. Showing up in town with an empty wagon would look suspicious. I climbed on the horse and looked around one more time. Not a sign of man or beast met my eyes. I slapped the reins, and the horse jerked forward. Now was my moment, I could feel it. I rode hard even though my eyes burned from lack of sleep. Luckily, Jemma and Grayson would have all day to sleep. I had no idea what my day would look like. I arrived at the castle shortly after daybreak and snuck back into my room, using the same part of the wall with the hay. Once my head hit my pillow, I fell instantly asleep. My door burst open sometime later. Unsure how long I slept, I opened my bleary eyes to find my father in my room. His face told the story before he opened his mouth. "Where is your brother Grayson?" I pulled a pillow over my head so he couldn't see my face. "How should I know?" "Because you are the last person who saw him. His guards reported him missing this morning and that you visited him last night." Dumb guards, I could never rely on them. I pushed the pillow under my chin. "Hey, the last time I saw him, he was fine. Those same guards will tell you I left that room only a few minutes after going in last night. You know Grayson can only tolerate so much of me." Father ground his teeth, but I knew he couldn't argue with that statement. Grayson was known for kicking me, his youngest brother, out of any room with the view that he couldn't handle me anymore. This isn't like him. He wouldn't disappear, Father said, shaking his head. I yawned and stretched but did not get out of my bed. "Have you checked the practice field? The tavern he loves so much in the center of town? Or I know the trophy room where he's probably ogling over his dragon head?" Father's face tightened even more, making his eye wrinkles stick out. "You're not still angry about yesterday, are you?" "Heck yeah, I was. Of course I am, Father. I killed a dragon just like Grayson, Gavin, Hayden, and Kaysen, but did any of us have our dragon's head stuffed and hung on the wall? No. I was simply brushed off again." Father looked down at his feet, not in shame but to gather his temper. "Son, if we hung every dragon head you boys have killed on the wall, our trophy room would have room for nothing else. And Grayson's was the first to accomplish such a feat. It is a symbol of the strength and bravery of my sons." "Yes, sons. Now get up and help me find your brother." He turned and stormed out of my room. I groaned. I probably only got an hour of sleep. I wanted to fall back on my bed and forget about yesterday and Jemma. She intrigued me more than I ever thought a girl could. I hoped she and Grayson were okay. I fell back on my bed, but the sun on the floor reminded me that my 4 days to win a spot to become crown prince had already shortened. 3 days to go. That thought alone was enough to get me out of bed. I walked over to the window and threw it open. The cold air hit me in the face. "Get a grip, Holden. Keep focused. Today is the day you win your spot." I called my manservant and changed into armor. It was only a matter of time before my father called for a full-on search. A search I would win. I had to win, or else everything Jemma and I had done would be for naught. I didn't have to wait long. An hour after my father stormed into my room, he called for the rest of my brothers and me to meet him in the throne room. We all arrived in the entry hall to find him in full armor. I was the only one equally prepared. My brother Hayden looked like he'd only just woken up. "Your brother Grayson is missing. We cannot find him in the usual places." He eyed me with that last statement. I stood taller. I refused to feel intimidated. I want him found, and I want him found now. My hands began to sweat in my leather gloves. Now was the moment. I had to secure my spot. I had to make sure he heard me. "Father, I want to find him, and when I do, I want to win my spot to compete for the chance to become the crown prince." Immediate laughter sounded around the room. My other brothers thought my request was funny. "Oh yes, Father, since finding one's brother is as good as what we've done." Hayden shook his head and pointed at me like I was nothing but a court jester. "I agree, Father," Gavin spoke up. "Besides, Grayson probably left for an evening hunt or a ride. He's hardly missing and in no way in need of rescue. Holden's request is ridiculous." Kaysen stepped forward. "But what if Grayson is in trouble? The Queen of the Dragons has threatened him more than once." Our father nodded at that. "And that, my sons, is my greatest fear. We searched the castle and the town. His dog is still in his room, his horse is still in the stable, and his sword sits even now on his bed. You know him well enough to know he'd never leave any of those items behind. My father spoke the truth. Worry crept into the faces of my brothers. I couldn't help the giddy bubble of the rose in my chest. The plan was working. I had to stop myself from smirking. I knew Grayson was safe. I'd left him with a competent and pretty witch. I want all of you to find your brother. And Holden. I will consider if your plea to win a spot to compete for the Crown Prince is worthwhile after your brother is rescued. Not quite the guarantee I wanted, but at least he'd think about it. It was better than nothing. I nodded. Now go and find my firstborn son. I want him to return home before nightfall. I knew it would only take about an hour to ride to where Jemma and Grayson were hiding. If I made this too easy, my father wouldn't award me a spot, but I had to act the part. I raced out to my horse. I told my 2 personal guards to come with me and rode in the opposite direction toward a nearby town. At my command, we split up and started searching the closest town road by road. We made a point to loudly ask everyone we met if they had seen the oldest prince. I felt a wicked sort of giddiness rising in my gut. Every hour that passed, I knew my father was more likely to award me my wish. We ran into Gavin in the middle of the afternoon. Any luck? For the first time, I heard fear in his voice. No, you? He shook his head. Father's near a full-on panic. And honestly, I'm starting to worry too. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. We will find him. We are heading out to start searching the hills right now. Good. Hayden searched the town of Langford and headed toward the gorge. I'm to meet up with Cassie in Furtooth. Father wants us all to report by midnight, if not sooner. Okay. I'll be there. With a nod, Gavin rode off with his men. That morning I had worried that 3 days weren't enough, but now, all I had to do was show up with my brother, and I'd get my reward with plenty of time to spare. Father could not deny me now. Note to self, remember to thank Jemma for her brilliant plan. I waved to my men, and we started riding toward the hills. My plan was simple, we'd start with nearby caves. Then when the sun set, I'd take my men to Jemma and Grayson. We vigilantly searched the barren hills for the last 2 hours of sunlight. When the sun set, I'd had enough fun and knew the time to triumph was suitable. I strode into the correct cave with my men right behind me. I was ready. Confident. I was excited about my victory. The first thing I noticed was the severe lack of light. I thought Jemma would have at least lit a fire. We held our torches high, trying to spread out their circle of light. The second thing I noticed were claw marks on the stone that wasn't there before, followed by scorch marks on the ground that could only come from the nose of a great dragon. My guts twisted in a way that made me gasp for breath. The claw and scorch marks were both new. I took a step back. We had to have walked into the wrong cave. But even as I thought that I knew, I recognized the squat opening. "Sire, over here," yelled one of my men. I rushed over to my guards, begging the universe that they were both still there. Not only still there but still alive. One body lay sprawled unnaturally out on the stone. Jemma. She looked pale, and the odd angle of her body made me worry. Search farther down the cave. He has to be here. They nodded and quickly followed my orders. I fell to my knees beside her. Jemma, please don't, you can't be dead. I shook her hard, she jerked, and then she sucked in a deep breath. Her eyelids fluttered like her eyes were returning to their proper place. They flew open, and she reached out and grabbed a handful of my dark hair. Ouch, Jemma, it's me. I grabbed her wrists and held her clawing hands still. Holden. Her eyes widened again, and she looked around the dark cave. Holden, they came. I couldn't stop them. She sniffed, her lips trembling like she was holding back a cry. I tried, I promise I did, but they were too strong. I couldn't stop them. I held her hands in mine, trying to calm her down. Slow down. Who came? She swallowed hard, her eyes still darting around in the darkness. The dragons took Grayson. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. They couldn't have. That was not part of our plan. You're not serious. She nodded, not looking at me. What happened? She let go of my hands and put her shaky hand on her left arm. For the first time, I noticed the burnt sleeve of her dress. She gently patted the singed skin of her arm before looking away from the injury. I knelt and pulled out a clean rag from my pack. Carefully I wrapped it around the red bubbled-up burn. She watched me, a tearful smile on her lips. Holden, they dragged him away. They told me to thank you for doing half the work for them and that they were waiting for such an opportunity as this. She shuddered, her good hand moving to hold her burnt arm gently. Her hand shook, and I couldn't help but wrap my hand around hers, holding her hand tight. She looked up at me and tried to smile, but instead, she shook her head, a tear rolling down her cheek. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry I failed you.
Chapter 5, Jemma. Holden held my hands as if in shock for a few minutes. He probably saw his whole future fading away like the moon waning. I knew I'd only known him for over a day, but I hated disappointing him. I hated failing the one person I'd ever considered a friend. The one person who didn't hold my magic over my head as if it were a gift for them to use. I hated that I'd failed in my plan too. What had I done? He cleared his throat, his eyes on our hands. Did they say anything else? I shook my head. All sorts of threats but no details about their plans. And if they had spouted off their evil ideas, I didn't have a chance to listen with all the screaming, mine and Grayson's after he woke. The sleeping spell had faded a lot faster than I thought. 2 dragons had come, one purple and one green. They'd plucked him up so quickly that I didn't even have time to process what was happening or think of a spell that might have helped. Holden hung his head. Do you know what this means? We are responsible for the kidnapping of the oldest prince. This is all our fault. He let go of one of my hands and threw a rock against the wall. I know. Part of me wanted to scream for joy. I wanted Grayson to hurt. I wanted him to regret what he did to me. But I wasn't an evil witch. I didn't want anyone to die for real because of something I did. Footsteps announced the return of Holden's guards. He quickly moved away from me. Neater, seize her. She aided the dragons in kidnapping the prince. My eyes flew open wide at the same time my mouth dropped. He was blaming me. Neater grabbed me quickly. I gasped in pain. Neater's hand gripped me on my burnt arm. Teeth clenched tight, I glared at him with as much fury as I could put into my eyes. I knew I should out Holden right that second. But he ripped the end of his shirt and quickly tied it around my mouth. He whispered with his lips pressed against my ear, causing a little warm shiver to run down my spine. Please do this for me. I'll get you out of this mess, I promise. But I cannot come back empty-handed. I need this. So like a prince, I grumbled. Always thinking about yourself. He tightened the gag muffling anything else I said. He took a step back, his eyes still pleading with me. We'd best bind her hands, she's a witch. Neater jumped forward, a look of panic on his face. He wrapped my hands in thick leather and tightened the ropes against my raw skin. I shot a dirty look at Holden. I couldn't believe he was doing this to me. I'll ride with the witch, Holden said, taking my arm and yanking me toward the horses. You two ride ahead and inform my father that the dragons have taken Grayson. But we caught the witch responsible. But, sire, we cannot leave you. Not with a witch. She might spell you. She is tied up and gagged. She can't speak or use her hands. I'm safe. The dragons have taken my brother. Nothing else matters but that we need to inform the king immediately. They nodded and mounted their horses but kept a close eye on us while Holden lifted me up on his horse. Holden swung up behind me and wrapped his arms around me to hold the reins. I felt my face flush. He was taking me prisoner, and I was blushing. I am a fool. I should never have trusted him. Holden signaled his men to move out, and they took off riding. Once they were out of earshot, Holden untied my gag. I'll have to put it back on when we get closer. What game are you playing, Holden? I didn't care if he needed this. No one should treat their friends this way. Unless he never saw me as a friend. How could I have let this happen? I'm trying to salvage the situation. He flicked the reins, and the horse took off. Hands bagged, I didn't have anything to grab onto and fell back against his chest. He let go of one side of the reins and steadied me. I don't know what I am going to do, Jemma. Grayson wasn't supposed to get captured by anyone except for us. You're clever. What do we do now? Seriously, he was asking for my help at a time like this? Don't you mean now that your brother is missing, and I'm stuck with the blame? I should have known you'd betray me. All princes are the same. Selfish and focused purely on their agendas. I can't believe you. You're mad. Wait, we can't both be mad at this situation. Oh yes, we could. Are you kidding me? Holden, I almost died twice in the last 24 hours. I have every right to be angry. Darn you, you're just like your brother. I shouldn't have even considered that you'd act differently than Grayson. But no, he wanted me to do his evil bidding and punished me when his precious plan didn't work out, just like you. You, princes, are all the same. Holden yanked on the horse's reins, and we jolted to a stop. Wait, hold on a second. Grayson was the one who wanted you to act like an evil witch. I nodded. It was time to come clean about at least that one thing. Holden sat there fingering the reins. Then Grayson hung you over that cliff. Grayson left you to die. You could have picked any of my brothers for this plan to work. But you chose him, for what, revenge? Of course, I did. It was my one chance to pay him back. To hurt him a little and help Holden at the same time. You don't understand. No, I don't. I thought we were at least friends. You wanted this to happen. You wanted us to fail, me to fail, and the dragons to capture him. I can't believe I trusted you. What did you do, call for the dragons right after I left? I call them. You're not serious. I would never. How could he toss all the blame on my shoulders? I was as much a victim here as Grayson. I couldn't believe this. You betrayed me, Jemma. Before I could open my mouth to say anything else, he retied the gag and whipped his horse into a run. I wiggled and nudged, but he didn't stop his quick pace. I stopped fighting him after a few minutes. I couldn't beat him and foolishly let him bind my hands. We reached the castle at record speed but needed to catch up to his two guards. The king himself tore down the front steps of the castle, Holden's guards behind him. Great. I didn't have a chance now. Is this her? The witch who delivered my son to the dragons? Holden nodded and climbed off his horse. The king approached his son and laid a hand on his shoulder. A small smile was behind the worry written all over his face. You've done well, son. I tried to yell through my gag that I was innocent. That Holden was as much to blame. He deserved no praise, but I couldn't get a single word through the gag. The king clapped his hands over his ears anyway and started shouting at the guards. Witches are tricky. Take her to the dungeons. Ignore anything she says. We won't let her get away with this. 4 guards surrounded the horse and yanked me off of it. They didn't even care that I was a lady. They led me away with a hand on my arm and no consideration for my burn injury. I looked back to see Holden watching me. I couldn't read his expression. His eyes contradicted the set of his mouth. Did he feel any guilt for this, or had my capture been part of his plan? Probably, I shouldn't have trusted him. I shouldn't have even called out to him from the cliff. The only hiccup in his supposed plan was that he'd lost his brother in a mess. I'd more than trusted him, I'd thought. I'd daydreamed, who cares what I thought? It didn't matter anymore. He'd betrayed me. I might have failed him by not protecting Grayson from the dragons, but I did not and never would have betrayed him. The guards led me through a small stone hallway and into the dungeons. They tossed me into a cell full of fresh straw. I sat down against the back wall and lightly touched my burned arm. A guard sat right outside of my cell. I'd better not risk any magic healing it. I didn't need any more trouble added to my situation.
Chapter 6, Holden. Throwing things against the wall did no good. Breaking things proved even worse. I'd done this to myself. I'd let myself get tricked into capturing my own brother. Sure, I wanted to see him suffer. Sure, I'd tried using him to accomplish my selfish goals. But I never wanted to see him dead because of me. I never meant to hand him over to his worst enemies. Gah! How had I let that blasted witch talk me into this? And now, with only 2 days until my birthday, I'd made my life worse than ever before. And I'd never become the crown prince. I'd never even have a shot, all because I listened to her. I picked up a book and threw it at my armor. It fell and clanged all over the floor. The door opened, and my guards rushed in. I pointed at my armor and shrugged. They sheathed their swords and left the room. I fell back into a chair. Father praised me for the first time that day. Something I'd wanted my whole life. Something I'd craved and worked for over the last 2 years. But instead of feeling overwhelming joy, I felt like a dagger had pricked my stomach. I felt sick, and nothing I did could relieve the discomfort. As much as I wanted to blame Jemma for everything, this was all my fault. I couldn't get the image of Jemma being dragged away to the dungeons out of my head. Her eyes hadn't shone with anger, they had looked like they were concealing pain. I shook my head and went to the cabinet where I kept my sword and daggers. I pulled the whole lot out and piled them on my table. I started rubbing one of them down with a rag, but the sick feeling only increased in my gut. I couldn't sit here while Jemma rotted for something we did together, and I couldn't sit here while Grayson was in danger. Father had sent Gavin and half the army after him, but I couldn't help but feel they'd fail if I didn't step in. I threw my dagger at the wall, and it stuck in the wood, the handle waving back and forth like my conscience. Left I go, right I stay. Left I go, right I stay. Back and forth until it settled firmly in the center, darn it. A knock sounded at the door. Come in. A servant entered and bowed. Prince Holden, your father wished me to inform you that the witch you caught has been sentenced to the stocks for refusing to talk during interrogation. He hopes spending the day there will loosen her tongue. I nodded. Thank you for informing me. He bowed again and left the room. I fell back into my chair and rubbed my forehead. I knew what I needed to do but didn't like it. I tapped my fingers against my knee and groaned. I quickly put my boots on and grabbed my jacket and sword. Before I could waver anymore, I raced down the hallway and outside. I lost my guard in the marketplace frenzy and headed directly for the stocks. I stopped when they came into view. 3 stocks had been built. They stood on a dirty platform in a shabby corner where 2 streets ended. Jemma stood bent over in the center one. Her dark brown hair was smeared with tomato and rotten squash. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes sad. I'd done this to her, I felt sick, but that didn't mean she didn't deserve this. My gut twisted more. Or maybe she didn't. I took a deep breath and approached her. A few kids threw a couple of tomatoes, missing her entirely. I picked up a large tomato from the barrel but did not throw it. Look who it is. She glared at me. Shush, I don't want to draw attention to myself. She scoffed. You put me in the stocks. Of course I did. You kidnapped the oldest prince. So did you. A woman behind me gasped. I turned to her and shook my head, smiling. She looked between Jemma and me. I mouthed witch and mimed crazy. Understanding flitted across the woman's face, and she nodded before she moved on. I strode forward so that the peasants wouldn't hear our conversation. You chose to help me only because it was Grayson we needed to kidnap. Admit it. You were so bent on getting your revenge that you didn't even care that doing this would help me until we failed. And now it's our fault he is in actual danger. You're right. It is our fault. You're as much to blame as I am, yet you're the one standing free holding a rotten tomato. My fingers massaged the squishy skin of the tomato in my hand. She wasn't wrong. I wanted revenge against him as much as she had. So much I hadn't even blinked when she suggested we kidnap him. I didn't even weigh the consequences of what could happen. Of course, I didn't realize how much the dragons had been threatening Grayson at the time, but that didn't matter. This was both of our faults. I looked at her covered in tomato, rotten vegetables, and cabbage, and the guilt twisted in my gut even more. That was the feeling that had tormented my heart all morning. Guilt. I sighed. I had to do something. I had to go after Grayson. And I owed her too. Look, we made this mess, and it is up to us to clean it up. I squatted down so that I could look her in the eye. She tried to look away, but the stalks didn't offer much movement. I'm going after him. I want you to come with me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't completely turn me down. Listen, Jemma. If you and I save him, I may at least keep you out of prison and the stalks. Maybe we can make up for this whole awful thing. She rolled her eyes. As much as I would love to go with you, I'm in a little bit of a predicament myself, if you haven't noticed, all thanks to you. I didn't deny it. Her present situation was entirely on my shoulders. I can get you out of there. I pulled my dagger out of my boot. How do you know I won't curse you where you stand? Because, believe it or not, I need you, and we can only do this if we work together. You said it yourself, you are not an evil witch. You care about what happens, I know you want to correct your wrong. Are you in? A group of kids rounded the corner, their arms full of more half-rotten vegetables. Her eyes flicked back and forth between them and me. Okay, I'm in. I raced behind her and cut through the ropes on the stalks and the ones on her leather-bound hands. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. That guilt twisted sharply in my stomach again. I pushed the top half of the stalks off her, and she fell backward into my arms. I knew we didn't have much time, so I scooped her up in my arms and raced down the alleyway. She curled into my chest and held on. We flew down the streets until I stopped to catch my breath behind one of the old inns. I set her down near the back door. I have a friend here. You might want to change before we face a dragon. She nodded, rubbed her still raw wrists, and offered me a smile that made my heart skip a beat. I reached out, pulled a glob of squash out of her hair, and tossed it to the ground. My fingers ached to touch her soft cheek, but I didn't think she'd appreciate that. For what it's worth, Jemma, I'm sorry. She nodded, a slight flush of pink on her cheeks. I never thought I'd choose to face a dragon. I laughed and wrapped her arm through mine, careful of her raw skin. It's no big deal. I should know. I knocked at the back door 3 times and then 4 more times. It flung open, and the innkeeper's wife stood there, her gray hair escaping her tight bun. Ah, Holden lad. Come in. She eyed Jemma. Mabel, this is Jemma. She needs a change of clothes and maybe a quick bath. We're on a quest and don't have much time. Mabel scrunched her eyes, taking in every inch of Jemma's disheveled state. Isn't this the lass they put in the stocks this morning? I sighed. Yes, and I just rescued her. We need to hurry. She laughed. Come on then. Jemma leaned in close and whispered. We can trust her. Yes, more than anyone else I know. You wait here. Mabel pointed at me and then to a chair. She set a bowl of stew on her table in the kitchen. I'll help the lass. She disappeared with Jemma. I sat down, and the smell of the stew instantly made my stomach growl. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. I ate a few bites and noticed something surprising: my gut no longer twisted in pain. All I felt was anxiousness trembling through my limbs. The anxiety that always accompanied a fight. After 2 bowls of stew, I sat back and waited. A few minutes later, Jemma came around the corner wearing a dress fit for a princess. Her long dark hair was all shiny and brushed smooth. I felt a lump form in my throat. Mabel pushed Jemma into a chair and put a bowl of stew before her. That dress was abandoned by a noble lady who didn't like that a sleeve felt a little thin. She shook her head and handed Jemma a fat slice of bread. I didn't want to waste a perfect dress, and it's a good thing I saved it. Fits the lass perfectly. And them flutter sleeves keeps her poor arms mighty free. Jemma smiled and picked up her spoon. Her wrists were wrapped in fresh linen, as were her forearm and elbow. I knew she could heal herself. I wondered if she'd let Mabel attend to her wounds to keep her from knowing about her magic. It made sense to me. No one trusted witches, hardly anyone trusted the royal wizard unless we desperately needed his assistance. "Holden, you need anything else?" Mabel asked. "No, but we need to get going." I couldn't stop the countdown in my head. I officially had one day after tonight. One day before, my future was sealed. But I couldn't fight this battle thinking that way. This needed to be about saving Grayson and Jemma. She quickly ate, and with borrowed cloaks and horses, Jemma and I rode out toward the Valley of the Dragons.
Chapter 7, Jemma. It didn't take long to find the cave that led to the Valley of the Dragons. We left the horses at the entrance. No sense in bringing the dragons their favorite snack, and the horses couldn't make it up the sharp cliff faces anyway. The entrance to their land wasn't exactly a secret, especially to the dragon-killing princes of our land. Scorch and claw marks lined the walls so thick we could hardly see the sandy color of the stone. Holden lit a torch, and we walked side by side. "I never thanked you for saving me from the stalks." He sighed. "You don't have to thank me. It's my fault you were there after all. I shouldn't have blamed you." He stopped walking. "You're the only friend I've got. I shouldn't have betrayed your trust." I held out my hand, and he looked at it, his eyebrows pinching in a way that made his handsome face even more so. "You take it," I said, wiggling my hand in front of his eyes. "Yeah, but what for?" I rolled my eyes and offered him my hand again. He took it this time. "From now on, we'll not lie to each other, okay? I trust you more than I should and want us to rely on each other. We're going to one of the most dangerous places in our world. I don't know what we will face, but can I trust that we will face it together?" He looked at his hand in mine, took his other hand, and sandwiched my hand between his own. "Jemma, I have been selfish and pig-headed and unfair. But I promise you that you can trust me. We are going to get through this together." I nodded, and he squeezed my hand before letting it go. Strangely, I missed the feel of his hand on mine the instant he let go. We continued through the cave until it twisted straight upward. Rough-hewn handholds dotted the way up the rocks. Holden rubbed his hands together and winked at me. "This is the tricky part." I felt a blush warm my cheeks, but I refused to acknowledge it. "How many times have you been here?" "To this point, a couple of times. Into actual dragon territory, only once." Holden put his hands on one of the handholds, and simultaneously a violent roar echoed through the cave. We both jumped. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it racing against my ribs. Placing my hand over my heart, I turned away and took a few deep breaths. A hand touched my shoulder, and I swung my fist on instinct and clocked Holden right in the shoulder. "Ouch, Jemma, that roar is far away. These caves echo." "Sorry. Didn't you ever dream of seeing a dragon as a kid?" he asked, rubbing his shoulder. He smiled, a teasing glint in his eyes. "Never wanted to. Never tried. Never thought I'd even get close." I honestly wouldn't have acted so scared if I hadn't faced a dragon only yesterday. I remembered their hot breath and their loud voices and how I trembled and failed to do anything but cower and pray. He took my hand in his again. Are you going to be able to do this? If you can't, I understand. I wrapped my opposite hand around my necklace. Yes, I can do it. We have to. I held onto my healing sliver. The one my mother infused healing magic into before she died. And I touched my wrists where they were rubbed raw. Slowly the skin mended. Holden's eyes bulged like they did every time I did magic. It was actually endearing. With my wrists healed, I moved my hands to the burn. It took a little longer to recover, but soon the skin turned light pink, and the pain faded. I nodded at him to ascend. Without a word, he reached up and pulled himself up the handholds. I followed and told myself repeatedly that the dragons only wanted to live in peace like us, which meant they could be reasoned with. I hoped. We climbed up the wall a few yards with Holden consistently just above me, but then quite suddenly, he wasn't. Holden. He poked his head over the top of a ledge and leaned over to help pull me up. That was the hardest part. Well, of getting through the cave. Should I thank you for that? He laughed. Probably not. He stood up and helped me to my feet. I pinched a sliver on my necklace, letting my hands glow in the darkness. Holden drew his sword. Together we walked along a few curves before light began to fill the cave. I let go of my necklace. We'd found the end of the cave. A large opening showed a valley full of sunlight and trees. We could even hear the sound of rushing water somewhere in the forest. Holden stopped walking and held out his hand to me. I still didn't know if I wanted to fully forgive him for sending me to prison and the stalks, but I didn't want to walk into the Dragonlands alone or with anger between us. We had to trust each other more than ever before. I took his hand, and we exited the cave together and stepped into the bright sunlight. I don't know what I was expected to find, but it wasn't silence. I thought your father sent people after your brother. Holden's eyes darted all over the small valley. He did. I gulped. I didn't like the sound of this. I pulled out my necklace and fingered the slivers of objects. I didn't know what I'd need, but I had to be ready this time. This time I would not find myself surprised. Holden and I walked farther across the small valley into the trees. Silence remained. They aren't about to ambush us, are they? I looked around at the empty sky. He squeezed my hand and laced his fingers through mine. I hope not. We followed what looked like a rough trail through the trees, looking for any sign of the men his father had sent or his brothers. Old footprints marked the ground, but mostly from wild beasts. There is more than one way into the Dragonlands, right? Holden nodded. Yeah, but the other way takes 3 days. The cave is the fastest way into the Valley of the Dragons. No way Gavin took the long route. His steps slowed. It is nearly impossible to climb that cave wall in full armor. Suppose they went the long way, that would leave Grayson alone with the dragons for 4 days. What is Gavin thinking? He started walking faster again, then suddenly stopped. Jemma, we might be Grayson's only hope. The only person Gavin felt stood in his way of becoming king one day was Grayson. What if he took the long route on purpose? I only understood a little about the rules of the royals, but this whole fight for the right to become crown prince and then king felt wrong. It turned the brothers on each other. Sure, I'd rather Holden become king than Grayson, but that didn't mean he deserved to be hated by his brothers. I think you're right. If the dragons kill Grayson, that is one less brother to fight. And the only person who intimidates Gavin is Grayson. Holden let go of my hand and kicked at a large rock on the side of the road, sending it flying. He bit his lip. I'm equally as guilty. No, you're not. You only agreed to my plan because we were not hurting your brother at all. Gavin is hoping he'll die. He stood there, and his eyes turned to mine like a rascal dog hoping to escape the cold. Holden, you're a good guy. I didn't think so at first, you do tend to be a little selfish. But you have a good heart, especially when it counts. And you're trying to fix the mistake we started, and that says it all. He smiled. Thanks, Jemma, so are you a good person, I mean. I laughed and nudged him with my elbow. Thanks. Now come on. We have a brother to save. We followed the path to a tall cliffside pockmarked with caves. This is the court of the royal dragons, Holden said. I suspect this is where they are keeping Grayson. He turned to me with all seriousness reflected in his eyes. You stay behind me, okay? I nodded. I had little experience with dragons and no problem with him leading the way. He drew his sword, and together we walked into the largest of the caves. The cave was littered with scorched bones and various pieces of armor. Holden scooped up a shield and continued walking forward as if he didn't fear the dragons. I was curious to know if approaching them directly was the best idea. But I followed his lead anyway. I didn't have a sword and doubted I could lift one of those heavy shields, but I had my necklace. I pulled it out and fingered the slivers. A dark, snake-like dragon appeared just before the natural light faded away. I grasped the back of Holden's arm. We beg entrance to the court of the dragons, Holden said. Who are you to make such a demand? His voice cracked with age, his tongue slithering out like the lizard he was. Prince Holden, fifth son to King Aragonot. The old dragon chuckled. A dragon killer. I have standing orders to kill a dragon killer on sight. He rose on his hind legs. His slithery tongue flicked faster. I took a few steps back. This wasn't how I wanted to die. I've come to make a deal with the queen for my brother's life. The snake-like dragon froze. A deep laugh bubbled up from his throat. A deal. Our queen loves to make deals. What a reward I will receive for delivering a dealmaker to her. So today, only you get a pass. He slithered out of the way, picked up what looked like a tiny piece of wood, and spit a burst of flame at it. The torch glowed, and the old dragon handed it to Holden, who had to sheath his sword to take it. I didn't like the look on the dragon's face, but Holden still didn't appear worried. Thank you, Holden said with a nod of his head. He held the torch up and waved for me to follow him. I walked past the dragon, his hot breath moving my hair like a gust of wind on a hot day. Do you know something I don't? I asked once we were alone in the cave. Part of me wanted to think this was all a ruse, a trick, part of the brothers' plan to get rid of me. But I had promised to trust him. I did trust him. Fear crept up and down my arms, making me shake. Holden turned his eyes to me. If you come in calmly, with respect, they are much more likely to talk to you. Do I dare ask you about the dragon you know? He hung his head. A young, arrogant beast who kept terrorizing a town. I won't blame them if they kill us on the spot for what I did. I know there wasn't much honor in my actions. He slid the shield further down his arm and switched the torch to his other hand, then held his arm out to me and pulled me next to him. I'm going to get us through this. Whatever it takes. We walked arm in arm down the long hallway-like cave until firelight from the end of the tunnel began to dance on the walls. Holden set his torch down before we stepped into the giant cavern. A large red dragon sat on a large pile of gold coins, statues, and other delicate objects of great worth. A small gold crown, encrusted with emeralds, sat crooked on her head. A green and a black dragon jumped toward us and blocked our path, red flames brightening their nostrils. No weapons or shields allowed in the court of the queen dragon, the green one hissed. Holden hesitated before dropping the shield, torch, and sword. I knew he kept a small dagger in his boot, but what good would that do for either of us? The dragons eyed us both before moving out of the way. The queen laughed as we walked toward her. I wondered whom that fool of a king would send after his most precious son. I hear you want to make a deal. Her eyes flicked to a cage where Grayson stood, his eyes wide and worried. Those eyes wandered to mine, and anger filled them. I shot him a dark look. If this whole venture didn't matter to Holden, then I'd leave him here to rot as he'd left me. I am Holden, fifth son of. I know who you are, the newest of the dragon killers. But I rather like your gumption. You and your lady friend practically gift-wrapped your brother for us, and we're ever so grateful. Red flame burned in her throat while she talked. And I know what you want. What you do not know is what I want. Holden shrugged. You're right. I don't. I want all of you dead, the whole kingdom. I want every last one of you gone so that none of my children have to worry about a sword-bearing assassin coming after them. She let out a hot puff of air directly in our faces. Holden stood his ground. That I cannot agree to. I know, she laughed. I know you want us all dead, just like we want that from you. I am prepared to offer you a deal. I ever so love making deals. Her eyes gleamed like we'd given her a second pile of gold. It's a challenge. Holden looked from me to Grayson and then back at the Queen of the Dragons. What kind of a deal? If you can live through my greatest weapon without hurting any of us in this room, I will grant your wish. For now, you can have your good-for-nothing dragon-killing brother and your lives. She snickered, a red glow in her eyes. But if not, you die, and I will take over your precious kingdom. I will wage war on every man, woman, and child and will do so with your blessing. Everyone will curse your name. I looked at Holden. We can't agree to that. Holden held up his hand, his eyes still on the great dragon. What if we don't take your challenge? She laughed, her eyes growing redder. Then I will kill both of you where you stand, then your brother and I will still take over your land as planned. Either way, we were done for. Either way, we lost. Had our meddling brought us to the brink of war? Holden turned to me. Jemma? I don't know what to do. Her terms are unacceptable. We can't let them declare war on our people. Holden bit his lip, his hands clenched into fists. If we accept your challenge and win, you have to add into our winnings that you will not attack our land. That you will live peacefully here, and we will live peacefully there. My eyes flicked around the cave. The room was full of dragons, all laughing. All looking at us as if we were the dumbest creatures ever created. All egging us on to take the Queen's rigged challenge. Holden, you can't agree to anything, Grayson yelled from his cage. You have no right. No authority. You're going to lose anyway. Turn tail and run and tell father to send his army. The dragons shifted to cover the entrance to the cave. They were not going to let us out. They had every intention of ridding themselves of us and the kingdom. The Queen tapped her claw against a boulder on the ground, shaving off rock chips with every strike. Are you going to listen to your brother? Are you too cowardly to take my challenge? She laughed. Fine. I agree with your minor change. If you live, you all go free, including your kingdom. If you die, then you all perish. Do we have a deal? Holden reached back for my hand, and I took it. I'd rather die for a cause than die as a coward, he said quietly. I squeezed his hand to let him know I agreed and then began looking at the slivers on my necklace. We had one hope to get out of here alive and save the kingdom from the wrath of the dragons. We had to live. Holden stepped forward. We have a deal. No! Screamed Grayson, followed by the roars of countless dragons. The queen dragon laughed and sent a small burst of flames our way. Holden pushed me to the ground just as the edge of my dress got singed. The queen laughed again. You're a fool, Prince Holden. She sent another blast at him, and he dove behind a rock. No one can withstand the flame of Claysator, the queen of the dragons. You've handed me your kingdom on a golden platter. She turned my way and sent another stream of fire near my feet. I crawled away behind a large rock. She was toying with us and making us suffer before she did us in. I twirled my necklace, sliding it around my neck. I had to have something, anything to help. I'm already bored of your cowardliness. She rose from her gold, causing coins to drop and clang as they fell from her scales. She snaked her head around the rocks. We were seconds away from losing our small cover. The queen moved closer to us. My army is ready to begin the fight. Don't worry, many more will join you in death before the day is done. Her head appeared right by the rock Holden hid behind. But he was waiting for her. He threw his body onto his arms and kicked at her with both legs. His boots landed right in the center of her nose. Her head shot up in agony, and she roared an ear-splitting roar. Holden fell to his hands and knees. I knew he had only seconds. I pushed myself up and raced toward him. He stood up and ran only a few feet toward me before the queen's eyes locked on his form. She opened her mouth, red burning in her throat. I knew Holden intended to push us both behind more rocks, but I had other plans. I grabbed Holden and yanked us both to the ground. I pulled him against me. With a sliver of a shield pinched in my fingers, I raised it past his back. The great beast's fire raged, burning everything around us. Holden's eyes widened. Don't move, I gasped. The tiny sliver of shield protecting us grew hot, so hot I could hardly stand it burning and blistering my fingertips. I winced, but I held on. This was our only chance. Jemma? It's hot. Tears fell down my face, but I didn't let go. I couldn't, not while the beast's fire blazed. I concentrated on the shield, imagining its circumference of protection and unyielding strength. I pushed all of my energy into the spell. I felt a small trickle of blood fall from my nose due to holding the spell so long against such great power, and my arms began to tremble. Jemma, stop. Holding the spell is killing you. Can't, I gasped. We'll die. We have no choice. I must do this. This is our only chance. Holden closed his eyes, put his forehead to mine, and wrapped his hands around my trembling elbows, holding my arms up. The tiny sliver grew even hotter, and I gasped in agony, but Holden's arms didn't let mine drop. The beast ran out of fire a moment later, and our arms fell to the ground. We were covered in sweat from the heat of the dragon's fire but certainly not burnt to dust. I let go of the tiny sliver and blew on my fingers. A black line from the fragment sunk deep into the skin on my thumb and index finger, seared there from the dragon's flame. You're not dead? The red dragon exclaimed with her eyes wide. No one has ever withstood my fire. Not ever. Holden rolled off of me and stood his ground in front of the Queen of the Dragons while I cradled my hand. We passed your test, Queen. He reached down and pulled me to my feet. I could hardly stand, and he wrapped his arm around me. I wiped my bloody nose on my sleeve, but it did little to help. Now, you must release my brother. You and I are royals. We are both bound by our oaths. I will see to it that no more dragon will be hunted from my land, and you will keep your dragons out of our land and release my brother. Her scaly lips curled, but instead of releasing another burst of her fire, she sat back down and nodded. I do not go back on my word, young prince, even if I thought I could never be beaten. She turned her head toward me. You, Lady Witch, are quite powerful. I think more powerful than you know. She bowed her head to me, and I returned the gesture. The queen turned to the dragons guarding Grayson's cage. Release the whelp. Holden scooped me up in his arms and pressed his lips to mine in a brief kiss. But a kiss that made my heart pound faster nonetheless. You did it. You saved us all. No, we did it together. Grayson came stomping past us. You're right, you did this to me together, and I won't let anyone forget it. He shot us both a dark look before storming down the cavern. Holden set me back on my feet. It sounded like our day wasn't nearly over. The queen dragon cleared her throat. If it is any consolation, young prince, I hope to see you on the throne instead of him. Remember our deal. She tossed him a dragon scale with her mark burnt into it. Take that as my promise to your king. Holden picked it up. I will remember. I will do everything in my power to keep our promise. The queen bowed her head to him, and Holden bowed back. You have earned my respect, young ones, none have survived my fire, before. Now don't make me lose my minimal respect for you and your kind. With that, she turned and sat back down on her hoard of gold. Holden tucked her red scale into his pants and took my hand. Together we raced out of the cave to the safety of the Dragon Valley and on to face our next challenge.
Chapter 8, Holden. When we found our way out of the cave, Grayson had already taken one of the horses. I was okay with riding with Jemma. In fact, I very much wanted to stay close to her. She kept looking at her burnt fingers. Lightly, like I'd seen her do before, she held onto her necklace, pressed her good fingers to the hurt ones, and murmured her spell. I fully expected the black burns to have faded, but the marks hadn't changed when she moved her fingers. Instead of trying again, she dropped her fingers and leaned back into my chest. You can't heal them? Nope. There are some things no one can recover from. These marks must be permanent because they were made with fire and magic. Don't worry, I'm okay with it, she said, looking at the marks on her fingers again. They are proof of a victory. An important victory. One I hope everyone will believe, I said. Are you worried about what Grayson will tell the king? She asked, worry evident in her voice. Less than I was when the queen dragon started shooting fire at us. She laughed, a sound I found I very much liked. Any chance we made the deadline? I looked up at the setting sun. I don't know. It felt like years in the land of the dragons. Honestly, I am more worried about what Grayson tells my father than if I lost my shot to become crown prince. Grayson wasn't exactly happy to see us rescue him. We rode hard and were soon back at the castle. The guards shouted at us the moment we arrived. The king wants to see you both in the throne room. Immediately. I looked both of us over. Singed and dirty, we were nowhere near ready to meet with the king. Nowhere near ready to explain our actions. I didn't stand a chance if my father was already bone-crushing mad. My father's guards didn't care that we didn't want to go immediately. They surrounded us and took us directly to the throne room. Jemma leaned closer to me and whispered. I don't like the sound of this. Me either. We entered the throne room to find the king, the whole high council, the army generals, and many other notable men and women of our country. Grayson stood in the middle of the room in a clean linen shirt, not a hair out of place, addressing the crowd. I moved to immediately sentence the witch to death for her actions in my kidnapping and attempted murder at the hand of the dragons. I also moved for the immediate disownment of my younger brother from the royal family. He flashed us a wicked smile and stepped down. My father took his place, his hands fisted on his hips, looking almost as vicious as the queen dragon herself. Holden, what do you say to these accusations? Grayson sat down with my other brothers, except for Gavin, who must have been still making his way into the dragon lands. What accusations, father? I stepped in front of Jemma. This wasn't her fault, and this was my battle. That you orchestrated the kidnapping of your brother with the help of a known witch. You handed him to the dragons, and you only saved him so that you could compete to become crown prince, that you set out to cheat your way into the competition for the crown. That you gambled with the lives of everyone in the kingdom. I took a deep breath and reminded myself I had faced a dragon today. I could face another. I ask you to listen to me, father. There is more to this than you know. I waited until the room quieted down. Yes, I have made some recent mistakes. Mistakes that could have gotten me, Jemma, and my brother killed. I wish I could go back in time and fix mistakes, but there are a few things my brother got wrong. I did not plot to hand him to the dragons. I did not wish him dead. I did try to cheat. I set up a situation I thought would win me a spot to become crown prince, and if that disqualifies me, so be it. Jemma is not to blame for any of this. The blame is mine. You cannot punish her. My father shook his head, his face one of total disappointment. And what about striking a deal with the dragons? A deal which Grayson said could have cost us all our lives. I cleared my throat. I had to choose my words carefully. The deal I struck was to protect our land, which I did. The dragons are no longer a threat to us. I pulled out the red scale with the mark of the queen dragon on it and tossed it to my father. The queen dragon herself offered this to me as a peace treaty. The people in the room gasped. Grayson leaned forward. You trust the word of a dragon? He laughed. You're still so dumb. Many people in the room nodded, but not all of them. The king took the scale and studied it. His eyes looked for a sign of forgery. Son, you have left me with little choice. I wouldn't say I like punishing my sons, but what you have done isn't something I can simply brush off. This, he said, waving the scale, is something significant, and I am not angry about anything concerning the dragons because of it. But it doesn't erase the things you did to your brother. For those actions, you need to be punished. Both you and your accomplice must suffer the consequences of your actions. Jemma pushed past me. I tried to pull her back, but she pulled her wrist out of my hold and stood in the center of the room before the king and the crowd. Guards rushed forward, but she stopped before the king and bowed down. I have something to say. Father liked nothing more than his subjects bowing down to him, so he held up his hands, stopping his guards. You may speak. Jemma stood and looked at the crowd in the room. Yes, Holden set forth to make his way into the competition. Yes, he kidnapped Grayson with my help. We both regret that. But he did not mean any harm. And you forget that when the dragons captured Grayson, Holden went himself, of his own volition, into the dragon lands and saved his brother. Like his other brothers, he did not escape the impossibility of the task or the insurmountable odds. He did not take the long way because of fear, like Gavin. Your precious Grayson won the chance to become the crown prince by only slaying one dragon. His brothers each followed his example, but since he had done it first, you, dear king. She curtsied. Wanted more from them. The king's angry eyes lightened a bit by her respectful mannerisms. By the time Holden was old enough to win a spot to fight to become crown prince, nothing he did mattered until now. Holden deserves a chance to challenge his brothers for the right to become king. He brought you a peace treaty from the Dragon Queen herself while rescuing your firstborn son. He deserves to fight for his chance to become king more than Grayson, who only killed a single dragon and... She paused like she was trying to decide if she should mention something. Something that I must not know about because I didn't have a clue what she would end that sentence with. Grayson made mistakes too. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. As I'm sure his other brothers did, too, if you dig into it. If Holden needs to be kicked out from competing to become the crown prince for his actions, then I think Grayson should be too. Grayson has made no mistakes, young lady. He is the victim here, the king bellowed, his face growing red again. Oh no. What about his attempt to convince a witch to murder the king before the trials could begin? To steal the crown from under everyone's noses before he's challenged. Everyone in the room gasped again, and many stretched to try and see Grayson's face. Grayson stormed forward. She lies. Jemma turned to him. I do not, and you knew I'd tell on you, so you strung me over a cliff and left me out to die when I refused to do your evil bidding. She pulled a crumpled piece of parchment from her bodice and handed it to the king. Grayson paled. Father unrolled it and read the inscription. It is in your oldest son's hand, is it not? Did he not request a spell that would hurt you? My father nodded. The room gasped again. I couldn't believe it. I knew Grayson had been the one to string her up, but I did not know it was because he wanted her to murder our father. Grayson stormed to the center of the room. Who are you going to believe? Your rightful crown prince or some witch? He bowed to the crowd, flashing what he must have assumed was a charming smile. But the group didn't buy it like they usually did. I believe her, I said, stepping next to her. And not only because I rescued her from the death Grayson bestowed on her, but because she saved us all from the dragons when she could have run away. She is why they are not raging a war on us right now. She is why Grayson and I returned home instead of becoming burnt piles of ash. I wrapped my arm around her, and she smiled up at me. Everyone in the room began to murmur behind their hands. The king tapped his fingers against his chest, his usual thinking pose. He was taking what we said into account. He looked down at the dragon scale and Jemma's grubby paper. His eyes wandered to Grayson and me, then back to the items in his hands. After a moment, he nodded to himself and stepped forward, effectively silencing the crowd. You are throwing some serious accusations at our Grayson, young witch. Accusations. I will follow up on these in the next few days. And you have made some valid points concerning my sons. Points I cannot ignore it anymore. Mistakes have been made. Cheating has become more common than I knew. The dragons were about to wage war. But I will not kick Grayson out of the running for the crown prince. I still believe he earned that spot. However, because of my youngest son's actions today, I will also allow Holden the chance to compete for the crown prince. He stepped back and raised his hands to the crowd gathered in the room. All 5 of my sons will compete for the right to become king. The room broke out into cheers. In 3 weeks, we will award the title of the crown prince to whichever of my sons proves his worth with honor, valor, strength, and integrity. Everyone in the room applauded. I thought I'd feel more elated at the chance to compete for the crown prince, but shock set in first. Minutes earlier, Jemma and I were about to go to prison for the rest of our lives. Instead, I had a shot at becoming the crown prince and king one day. You did it, Holden, Jemma shouted in my ear, hugging me tightly. You won your spot. No, we did it together. I raised her hands to my lips and kissed them before I laced my fingers with hers. Without Jemma's help, I never would have stood a chance. Without her, my father wouldn't have known about Grayson's attempt on his life or the impending war with the dragons. For what it's worth, I'm glad I saved you the other day. She laughed. Oh, now rescuing a damsel in distress counts in your book. You know it always did. Although, I held up our clasped hands. This, I didn't predict. She held me a little closer and laid her head on my arm. Me neither. The end.
Note from the author. Hi awesome reader. Thank you so much for listening to this fun little novelette. I hope you enjoyed it and will also read and love my other books. I love writing and sharing stories and hearing from you through a review and participation on my social media pages or by email. Thank you again for reading. Because of you, my dreams have come true. Cassie M. Shiels. This book is also available on Amazon. Like and subscribe for more content and keep reading.